Psychoanalytical criticism at its core is basically thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and there's two ideas to this. It's how thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are impacted and are influenced by unconscious thought, and the idea that like unresolved trauma and events that have impacted you in the past can impact how you think and how you go about some things now, as well as the fact that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can impact relationships you may have or otherwise like bonds within a storyline. So in psychoanalytical criticism, there are two like kind of divisions or main ideas, main people we follow, and these are Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, and these two were very influential psychologists during the 1900s, and they shape most of the ideas of psychology we think of today. So they're the main ones that are always brought up in this like criticism and lens. So in Wuthering Heights, basically, I use the idea of relationships more to reflect these ideas just because I found it as the easiest. So in Freudian psychology, basically, the one I chose was more character analysis based. So obviously in Wuthering Heights, the main plot revolves around the relationship and or love triangle, if you really want to call it that. That's kind of what I thought of it as, of Edgar, Catherine, and Heathcliff. So basically, like, starting with Heathcliff being taken in and, like, falling in love with Catherine. And although they had a relationship, she ended up leaving for Edgar. So in Freudian psychoanalysis, there are basically three ideas of, like, main thought process, how we go through things, how we make decisions, and these are the ego, the ID, and the superego. And in Wuthering Heights, and specifically in this like kind of relationship, each character is reflective of one of these like ideas. So the ego is the part of our thought process that is very defensive, very rational, and it basically thinks through things a lot more than it would be like running on impulse. And in this relationship, the idea of the ego would be considerate to Catherine for the only reason that she's basically the realistic and rational one out of the relationship. She's very defensive and self-serving in that idea because she married Edgar for his social status and money, which was very important for her. Like, she needed the stability and like the social status. That's what she wanted. And basically the main example of this kind of like her being defensive, her being self-serving is in the book where Catherine rants to Nellie Dean about how she's going to marry Edgar, and how she says, when Nellie is constantly asking, why are you marrying him? She kind of goes, well, he has this, and she goes, that's not a good reason. But Catherine kind of defends herself and says, like, it is a good reason. So that's basically, like, that would be the ego in this situation, because she is very defensive and doesn't really, like, not that, yeah, she's very, like, self-serving in that idea. So the next one would be, obviously, the ID, which this is the part of the brain which is very impulsive. It kind of just, runs on instinct. If you want something, you take it. So, in this situation, the ID would be Heathcliff, because, for obvious reasons, but he is very driven by emotion and selfish throughout the whole book, but especially when it comes to Catherine, because, he really shows, well, Catherine and other relationships, but he really shows no remorse or like concern when it comes to others, particularly when he's using them for his own benefit. I mean, in this case, throughout the story, it was the idea of revenge, but the main example was not only did he use, like, not really use Catherine, but he kind of was very obsessive over her and kind of tried to like interact with her or whatever. But he also used Hareton, which was Hindley's son, to get back at Hindley, and ended up basically mistreating him as Hindley did him, which in itself was driven by the idea of revenge, and was very like impulsive. Like, he didn't really think things through. It wasn't really for the benefit of everyone else. It was just for the benefit of him, and the idea of that he needed that kind of revenge. And then obviously the last one would be the superego, which is basically the one that kind of balances the two out, the ego and the ID. So in this, the superego would be Edgar, because he's kind of like the social normality of the book. Because if you think about it, like, he kind of believes like the social status of marriage. And like stuff like that. And he's also very like intellectual. He kind of thinks through ideas more than one or the other do, especially when they're together. Catherine and Heathcliff were very like acting off of each other, but that's for the next idea. And basically, like, the whole idea of this was he married Catherine. Like, he was almost like a level-headed to Catherine sometimes too, when it came down to it. And then, so yeah, like, they kind of all had their own like place in the story and characters in the story, and they all complemented and got in the way of each other, which is very like evident in the story. So for the next idea of like Carl Jung, it was I also did a character analysis of a relationship, but this time just between Heathcliff and Catherine. So for this, basically, it's the idea of personas and how Catherine and Heathcliff are basically act as two sides of the same persona, or the Nima and the Nemes, again, two sides. And basically the representative of the traits the other lacks in a certain situation, which for this is basically they bring out emotions, basically driven by the fact that they bring out emotions in each other and they also complement each other. So for Catherine, this would be Heathcliff kind of brings out the anger, hostility, the idea of freedom. If you think when they were like younger, they always went out on adventures, and it was they were kind of just very carefree, you know, in that kind of sense, but also like command, rebellion. If you think, again, Heathcliff, he was very like rebellious and just impulsive in that sense, so, which Catherine was not normally. So he kind of brought out that side of her. And for Heathcliff, Catherine is kind of a representative of beauty, love, status, as well as belonging, which that wasn't really something that he experienced that much. Basically, like, well, with belonging too, is like Catherine and Heathcliff's relationship was the only one that was really nurturing and loving. So when he lost that, obviously, like, he was really driven by revenge, like I mentioned before. But basically the main examples of this was like I said, Catherine became more spontaneous and impulsive around Heathcliff. They always went on little adventures when they were younger, and it was just very evident that, not that she wasn't the same person, but that she kind of acted different around him. And same with Heathcliff and Catherine's relationship. Like, it was very loving and nurturing, which Heathcliff had never really had in the past. But the main, basically, idea of, like, Heathcliff and Catherine acting off of the same persona and basically being the same person and, like, being very connected is the idea that in a conversation that Catherine had with Nellie Dean, she basically said that she is Heathcliff. She stated that I am Heathcliff, which is very representative, that even she knows that, like, they basically are the same person. They are of one, like, persona or, like, feelings. And it's basically the idea that, like, they, like, kind of, like, influenced off of each other. They impacted each other, and, like, the feelings that they did have can, like, it was just very representative of the traits that the other lacks. So yeah, that's all. I don't know, I filmed this video like 5 times because I'm stupid and kept messing up, and people keep looking at me from outside. So